Smallville, welcome to the first ever episode of the Meaning of Podcast. I am Ace, this is RB3, and it's here, guys. We finally have our own podcast. We're going to be talking about film, we're going to be talking about directors, and the first ever director that we want to talk about is Mr. Darren Aronofsky. Now, before we get into Darren and before we get into the meaning of his films, we want to talk to you about a little bit about what our podcast is about, essentially. Now, essentially what we want to do in this podcast is bring you what our personal interpretation and what our personal identification is with each one of these directors' films, right? So we're going to have a different director every week. We're going to run down their filmography or the filmography that we feel more connected to. And then we want to give what our interpretation is for their films, whether it be symbolism, whether it be social commentary, whether it be metaphors, whether it be deeper meanings and messages, or just it could be what we feel the film is trying to say or what we personally felt in that moment during the film. So it's not necessarily, this is what the director was trying to say, period. It's more open to interpretation, and the interpretation that you're going to get is RB3 and I's interpretation. So if we bring up a movie and he thinks of a certain moment in his life that reminded him of that movie, then that's what he'll talk about. It doesn't have to be about what the filmmaker wants to say. It's more about what we want to say about the filmmaker. So don't get mad if we don't bring up a certain message or a certain philosophy that we may have not talked about, because we're going to be talking about what we personally identify with in the film. So obviously we're going to get a little personal, RB3. I don't know if you're okay with that or not.
Yeah, I'm always okay with digging in deep into director's filmography, so this is going to be great.
Yeah, so obviously everything is about how we personally identify with the meaning of each filmmaker. And Darren Aronofsky is a big one. Obviously, Mother recently came out, and Mother has become one of the most divisive films of the year already, which to me is a little surprising. I mean, I don't know. To me, it just wasn't as shocking, I guess, as what people are saying that it is. But yeah, it's a very divisive film, and a lot of people are talking about it. So we want to talk about it, but we're going to talk about it at the end.
Yeah,
first,
we're going to spoil it too, so we got to say.
Yeah, we're going to talk about plenty of spoilers. But let's start out with Darren Aronofsky in general. Let's start out with... let me start out with a question to you. What do Darren Aronofsky's films mean to you, RB3?
Well, Aronofsky is funny. Like, when you look at his films, the way he constructs cinema, the way he looks at cinema, he's very much in a formalist kind of fashion. He identifies a lot with the form of cinema, the art of cinema, the techniques that can be employed to enhance the narrative that cinema represents, kind of almost in an expressionist kind of way. Mm-hmm. He often uses a lot of tricks with the camera, with the editing, with the sound, to fully immerse the character, fully immerse the audience into the character's perspective. It's kind of giving the audience a subjective camera, by featuring a lot of close-ups, featuring a lot of tracking shots, making sure that you are put into the mind of a particular character, and that's what we see in a lot of his films, right? We see a lot of hallucinations, we see a lot of dream sequences, which normally I don't really enjoy dream sequences. I think it's kind of cheesy.
Yeah.
But Aronofsky does it really well, and again, he uses the subjective camera to put you behind the driver's wheel of the subject of the story. So that's what's interesting about him.
Yeah, absolutely, and obviously, again, we're gonna get what we feel, and what I feel is, let's just say I took a huge deep dive into Darren Aronofsky, a little bit more than I thought I would for this podcast, in preparation for this podcast. Damn, dude, I just went, I told you when you came in today, I was like, dude, I went full Aronofsky this week. Dude, I think the guy's a genius. I think he really is like a mastermind. I've been watching a lot of his films, and this is my thing. Being on film sets, and I know you can probably agree with me on this. A lot of people have said, what is the main purpose of a director? What is the main point of a director? And I've always felt like the most important thing a director can do is two things, and it's basically the same thing. It's identify the character, tell the character's story in the narrative of the film. And when it comes to being on set, It's getting the actor to give the best performance in that character. And say what you will about Aronofsky's films, every one of his films features amazing performances. Absolutely amazing performances.
Yeah.
And that's when you see talent. You see true talent in a director when they bring the best out of their actors. And I feel like every single one of his movies, you have performances that are just legitimately Oscar-winning performances with some of them.
Yeah.
And with others, should have been Oscar-worthy winning performances because they're so freaking good.
Well, I mean, look at movies like Requiem for a Dream, nominated for Best Actress from Ellen Burstyn. Black Swan, Best Lead Actress, Natalie Portman. The wrestler, Mickey Rourke, who was nominated, and in that year, many people thought he should have won when they actually gave the Best Actor to somebody else. And now there's a lot of buzz, obviously, surrounding Jennifer Lawrence's mother.
Dude, I mean, absolutely, I agree with that. Jared Leto as well. Jared Leto kind of made his name with Requiem for a Dream. And then you said Jennifer Lawrence with Mother. Dude, The Fountain. Holy crap. Hugh Jackman broke my heart. Rachel Weisz broke my damn heart in that movie. It's because of her performance, and that's based on Darren Aronofsky's talent as far as getting actors to truly feel every inch of emotion that he has for that character.
Fun fact for I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Fun fact for The Fountain though, Brad Pitt and Kate Blanchett were originally supposed to be. That's right. That's what he had in mind. Yeah.
Let's cool. That's just my take with Aronofsky. Obviously, what you were saying as a director as well. He not always, but he really uses those tight tracking close-up shots that makes the character look like they're going crazy, like he does in Requiem for a Dream. He does it in Black Swan. He does it in A Mother. It's that crazy mounted shot of the person's face, and they're like just running around or something, and then the camera's just on them the whole time when they're going crazy.
Well, his use of handheld camera work is really another factor. And just beyond the camera, you look at the lighting in his films. I mean, we're going to talk about the films individually, but every time it's kind of like a thematic thing in his movies. Every time there's a big dramatic moment where a character has to make a decision or there's a changing point, you always see like the lights start to strobe. Like the end of Requiem or Black Swan or The Wrestler. Of course, the sound design plays a huge part into everything that he does. Of course, the editing, he kind of coined his own term for his editing style that particularly uses a lot in Pi and Requiem for a Dream. It's called a hip-hop montage.
Yeah, hip-hop montage.
The direct quote that I have from him is that when I was in college, I was experimenting with this idea, and I think it came out of the fact that I grew up in Brooklyn in the 80s when hip-hop was exploding. And I was trying to fuse the idea of sampling to storytelling. So in the hip-hop montages, his idea is that each a rampant succession of cuts that are each defined by an individual sound effect. So in Requiem for a Dream, we see that anytime they're like shooting heroin or whatever they're doing, and Pi when he's having those long montages like math and all that stuff, and it's been so influential that a number of other directors have employed that. Edgar Wright uses it a lot now. Joseph Gordon-Levitt used it, and Don John quite a bit. So it's interesting how his formal techniques have transcended his own movies in just a shorter period of time. I mean, his first debut feature motion picture was Pi, which came out in 1999.
Yeah, I thought it was 98, but you probably know more than I do.
Well, I believe it debuted at the Sundance Film Festival in 1998, and he won Best Director.
You're smarter than me, man.
No, I'm such a big Aronofsky fan, so I'm very excited to be talking about him.
Oh, me too, man. Today. Honestly, yeah, man. I mean, what you just said right there too. I keep thinking of, you know what I keep thinking of, RB3? His sound design, obviously the way he uses, not just, he does it a lot in Black Swan, Mother, and Requiem, where it's the gradual increase of sound effect, right? Where it's really, really quiet and then really, really loud, and then it's like it gets in your face and you're like, oh, what happened? Like he did it a lot in Mother, which freaked people out. That little until it gets super loud. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Right, exactly.
Cool.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm looking at you like, what are you talking about, dude?
No, 100%. No, I agree.
The increase in sound, he did it with the fridge in Requiem for a Dream, where it just got louder and louder and louder until it's like so freaking loud. Like he does that really well. But one thing that a lot of people don't talk about, or at least I don't feel like they talk about enough, is not just his use of sound design, but his use of score. Every single one of Aronofsky's movies features a score that will murder you, legit murder you.
Requiem for a Dream.
Requiem for a Dream is an amazing score, amazing soundtrack. The Fountain is just, it breaks your heart just listening to that song. And Black Swan, using the Swan Lake music and using other original music. The way, it's not like he makes the music that makes it so beautiful. Obviously, it's the other composers that make it. But it's the way he uses the music so beautifully. Yeah. Like in the ending of the Black Swan, when she does the final dive, and then the music crescendos up to the final, like da-da-da, da-da-da. It's just beautiful. And I was watching Black Swan last night, rewatching it for like the third time, and just watching that scene again, I was just like, man, that's the perfect timing in music, as well as in The Fountain. And Requiem for a Dream, right? Because when he's doing that whole montage moment at the end, he has that. And it kills you because you're just like, this is, it went from like a cool kind of electro beat to like a horror soundtrack.
Yeah, that theme became so iconic that it became like every trailer music. Started using that soundtrack, which I think speaks volumes for.
Speaking of that, let's just do it. So what we're going to do right now, guys, is we're going to dive into some of his films. I ordered it in a certain way. We can jump around. We don't have to follow this order, but it's an order that I kind of liked. So we're going to start with Requiem for a Dream.
Right.
This movie is... Whew, this movie's a lot. This movie is considered to be one of the most disturbing, depressing, dark movies around. It really is just one of the most, like, it destroys you. It obliterates you. It makes you feel so terrible. And it really is due to the genius of Aronofsky's filmmaking. Whether it be the editing, the sound, the storytelling, the acting. It's just... Requiem for a Dream, man. I don't know. What are your thoughts on this movie? Because to me, I think it's a masterpiece the more I look at it. I mean, I rewatched it on Friday, and I was like, man, this thing's really a masterpiece.
Right. I mean, I definitely agree. To me, it's actually Aronofsky's magnum opus. It's his best film. I think he'll have a hard time topping that. The performances in that movie, as we talked about, it was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Actress in a Leading Role. We obviously saw the debut of, not the debut, but we start to become familiar with actors like Jared Leto, Jennifer Connelly, Damian Wayans Jr., which is actually
isn't that
Marlon Wayans? Yeah, Marlon Wayans. Yeah, my bad. Yeah, Marlon Wayans, which is mind blowing that he's in this movie. Yeah,
and he's great.
He is great.
He's great in this movie.
Aronofsky has kind of described this movie as an urban fairy tale. It is his attempt with that, along with Pi. We're not really going to discuss Pi a lot, but I think Pi is amazing as well.
It is. It really is. And it's his first beginning of the Aronofsky-isms that we're talking
exactly.
about.
Yeah, it's his debut feature, and of course, Requiem followed right after.
Yeah.
In the featurette for Requiem for a Dreams, the Blu-ray, he considers it urban fairy tale, a cautionary tale for the obsession and addiction, which we eventually see throughout his filmography, not just addiction to drugs, but addiction and obsession of a particular goal, of getting somewhere. And what are the consequences of that? What are his characters willing to put up in order to achieve their goals or to feed their addictions? Yeah,
absolutely. Let's talk about the cast a little bit. Now that you haven't brought him up, Jared Leto. Jared Leto. It's so funny because what Jared Leto is now is the Joker, and people calling him crazy and stuff like that. I love Jared Leto. I mean, again, this is all personal, right? So we're gonna talk about what we personally identify with these films. I personally love the guy. I think he's great. I think he's an artist. I love what he does with his music, and I love what he does with his movies. But it's crazy how he gives such a raw performance. There's that scene when he's driving away from his mom's place in the car, and he starts to break down a little bit, and then he kind of stops himself and then breaks down again. It's just little moments like that that really make him a great actor. And again, I give all credit to Aronofsky for bringing that out of Leto, because I feel like Leto is a talent, but I feel like a true talented director brings it out of a performance. Now, remind me her name. I'm sorry, the mother.
Ellen Burstyn.
Yeah, she breaks my heart in this movie, man. I mean, she breaks my heart. I mean, the whole, the whole relationship between mother and son, and the whole relationship between, a son moving away from her mother and kind of forgetting about her, and a mom's, goal to want to feel a connection to a son is just so powerful, and it's so well felt in this movie, and that's why it makes it so much more heartbreaking at the end of the movie, because you feel like that connection is crazy. Jennifer Connelly breaks my heart in this movie, especially at the ending of the movie. She gives probably her greatest performance ever. I don't know if I can think of any other Jennifer Connelly movie that is as amazing as she does in Requiem. Every performance in this is just top notch. It really is.
Yeah, and I think it definitely speaks to the talent that he's able to attract for these roles, right? I mean, I remember reading a story that when Ellen Burstyn and Jared Leto were having that scene in the kitchen where they were just talking to each other, like the DP behind the lens was had the shot like slightly out of focus, and it was like he couldn't really see because his eyes like behind the lens were like actually tearing up from like her performance in that, and the way he's able to define each characteristic, why each character is motivated to do what they are doing, and why they're in the position they're in now, and how they plan on going and achieving their goals is what defines how strong his performances are able to go, because he's able to describe to the actors, explain to the actors, make it relatable to how to deliver that kind of powerhouse statements. And I think speaking on that character in particular, it kind of speaks to like the larger context of his filmography. Obviously, the relationship between mother and child that we see throughout his
all his movies,
pretty
much all his movies.
And the wrestler's a little different. We're going to talk about that too. That's more about fatherhood, you know? But
it's still that parent-child conflict.
Right. But we see particularly with mothers in his films that they provide like a guiding light, trying to help their child and support their child in a way that a lot of adult children, not adult children, but lineage of a parent don't really want to listen to, don't really want to relate to. And that's something that we all could get behind. And that's why I think his films are so powerful, is because he's able to relate those broad strokes into like these interesting character pieces. Yeah.
And obviously we talked a little bit about the actual filmmaking, of Requiem for a Dream being one of the greatest, I think one of his best films, and just a true masterpiece as far as editing, music, sound design. The score, the way he uses the score is phenomenal. The shot composition, the shot selection, the way he uses the mounted camera shot, the one I told you about earlier, about the crazy shot of the person and it's all close up, and it's like following them around, and they're like going, like especially with the mother at the end of the film. It's
haunting.
It's a visceral shot. But let's talk about a little bit about what he's trying to say in this movie. Let's talk about drugs, RB3.
Right.
What do you think about his message as far as drugs, as far as addiction? Right, it's more about addiction than it is about drugs.
Yeah, I think it's definitely more about addiction, and of course, it's a commentary on how pharmaceutical drugs, prescription drugs, can be almost or even more lethal than what's out in the streets. What's out with heroin and cocaine and all that stuff that we all see explored in this film. And and in that, he's kind of, this was coming at the time of the beginning of like the Bush era, you know what I mean? Like the early 2000s, where we've been fighting the war, where America at least has been fighting the war on drugs for quite some time. We've seen a number of like PAs and PSAs, I should say, and messages and message films about drugs. And this one kind of subverts a lot of those tropes. Instead of having like a happy ending where there's some sort of relief or rehab, it shows you the consequences of addiction and where that could lead characters or people in general. And like I said, it's a commentary on the pharmaceuticals as well. How dangerous are those? And again, the original book that is based on was written in the 1970s, and the book that's based on is also a commentary on like improper medical practices. And updating the film for the 2000s, the film actually really doesn't have much of a time period. We don't see a lot of things that date the movie. The television that they use in there is obviously a commentary on the media and whatnot. Is fantasization of reality and whatnot. But he kept the similar elements of the original book, talking about the improper medical practices from the 1970s. And even though those practices may be out of date now, he still kept those in, especially at the end with like the electrocution.
Oh yeah, electroshock.
The electroshock therapy, yeah. And cutting off his arm.
Amputation.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So it's very fascinating what he has to say about those.
It's absolutely fascinating. And again, I want to take it in a different direction as well, because it's that whole concept of addiction and drugs. And obviously you know this, RB3, but a lot of people might not know this, is my connection with it, which is I'm the most hardcore straight edge person you'll probably ever meet.
Yeah.
I'm super.
Right.
I hate the concept of it's the concept of like, you're addicted to drugs, now take this drug to get off the addiction that you have to that current drug.
Right.
It's like, it's a circular cycle of insanity of how
it's
unescapable drugs and I have a very connection to it, because I'm very anti-drugs in the sense of like, I don't do anything. I don't do any kind of drugs or any kind of enhancement to my body, because I hate it so much, even when it comes to like medical type shit, unless it's necessary for my living, of course. But I've been to so many doctors and so many places when I talk about my trouble of sleep, or I talk about this, and they're like, cool story, take this pill, you'll sleep.
Right.
Cool story, take this, you'll feel better. And it's like, I don't want to take that. I'm here because I want to find a different way. And it's the drug obsession society that we live in is so apparent, not just with illegal drugs, but with, like you said, over-the-counter prescription drugs and stuff like that, and pharmaceutical drugs. And it's just a downward spiral of being so addicted to something that we're willing to give our lives up for it, which is eventually what they do at the end of the movie, which comes to Jared Leto's arm, Jennifer Connelly just giving her body up, which is disgusting as hell, to say the least. And then
it's hard to watch.
It's hard to watch, dude. It's so hard to watch. And then obviously Marlon being stuck in that crazy prison. That scene is so.
That's another example of like the connection to motherhood. Yeah. He has that whole theme in the movie where he's longing to reconnect to his mom, but he can't do that now that he's locked up, in jail in Florida, I believe that's where.
Yeah.
So
it's gnarly, man. And then obviously he feels there's a crap ton of racism in there when he's in there as well,
right.
And mistreatment towards him because he's black as well.
Right.
And obviously with Leto's mom at the end of the movie as well, just being completely destroyed. And you almost feel worse for her, which you're supposed to, because it's such an innocent want to want to lose weight. And yet for that innocent want, she completely destroys herself, almost worse than anyone else in the film, right? I mean, you can argue for a lot of them, but it breaks your heart with the mom, especially with the ending of the movie being the fantasy of her and Jared Leto at the end of the movie being like, I love you, Mom, me too, you're on TV, and they're waving at the cameras and they're all happy.
Right.
Like, that's what she always wanted, and her fantasy is never completed.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, the movie, the last 15 minutes of the movie when it's doing that crazy montage and the score is full blast, kills you. It murders you. As an audience member, you're just like, God, this is horrible.
Right.
I feel like I'm watching a horror movie, and that's kind of what Aronofsky wanted to do. He wanted to make a horror movie, and a different type of horror movie, and it really hit, because I don't know if I can rewatch that again, because it's so horrifying. Even though you get what he's doing and he does it so well, Aronofsky just murders your heart straight up.
And from a technical standpoint, I mean, that whole ending was so fascinating, because you could tell, like, when you watch it, as the pace begins to pick up, it's all like individual stories, how they're starting that whole sequence, off individually. But then as they start to get more and more involved, it's like the cuts become faster. The sound design actually, before you start a scene, the sound of that scene will start playing before, and it's like already like mentally prepping you, like, all right, here it comes, and then boom, the imagery becomes like way worse, way more exploitive, and it almost kind of blends all of their struggles together. Like, oh yeah, they're in the same boat. This is where addiction leads. No matter who you are, no matter what background you come from, addiction is so powerful and so lethal and so dangerous that it will just destroy lives. So
Yeah,
it's fascinating.
Yeah. Is that your last word on Requiem for a Dream before
Yeah,
we move on?
yeah, that's definitely my
cool.
last.
My last word is I love that shot of Marlon and Jared Leto when they're in prison.
Right.
And it does that crazy like
shaking, yeah.
And then Marlon screams. He goes, "Help me!"
Right.
That shot to me, that's just pure filmmaking. It's amazing. Cool. Let's jump over to two of his other films. Let's start with. I kind of want to jump into both of them, but let's start with The Wrestler and Black Swan.
Okay.
Two films about people who are very much
Motivated by their work. Yeah, by their craft.
Yeah, so this one obviously it got Mickey Rourke a nomination and it got Natalie Portman the Oscar. So that's another testament to what Aronofsky does with performances and what he does with characters. Because it's crazy, like rewatching Black Swan last night, like I said, just you get so much out of Natalie Portman in 15 minutes. It's crazy. You see her face, you see just visually, right? You see she's young, she's super freaking skinny, but she's not too young where you're like, wait a minute, why are you still with your mom? You look like you're 26 maybe. She's an obsessed dancer and she's very like, the way she holds herself is very proper, very like refined, very like, I don't want a grain of dust on my shirt. Right. And you get that in 15 minutes of Black Swan. Like that to me is just, that's how good Aronofsky is at identifying a character, right? Where you're like, I know who that is and she really hasn't said anything yet. Yeah, that's one thing that I very much notice in the way he does characters in Black Swan and in The Wrestler.
Right. I think from a stylistic point of view, these movies are very different, but thematically they're almost the same, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think a lot of what Aronofsky's films are one man or in one woman versus the world, but in The Wrestler and Black Swan, it's like yourself versus yourself.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They're fighting their individuality or their perception of individualism to trying to overcome that in order to strive and get to their goal. And again, it plays into the idea of obsession and addiction. I mean, Mickey Rourke's character is like obsessed with wrestling. He's addicted to it. He can't retire. Even when he retires, he's just thinking about it. He's trying not to, get back into that lifestyle, but it just keeps calling to him.
Yeah.
And he's fighting himself. It's like the duality within his own mind. And of course, in Black Swan, that actually matriculates visually. Yeah, she sees like a clone of herself. Like an evil clone in this, and that's where I think like the style differences come in.
Sure.
Definitely The Wrestler is probably the most grounded Aronofsky movie we're ever going to see.
That's a very good point.
Yeah,
that's a very good point, man.
I mean, that's
the most, linear narrative storytelling face value movie we're ever going to get from Aronofsky.
Right, and I think it's attributed to the subject matter, obviously, because when you're doing a film about wrestling, it's easy to make it look like it's a joke, it's supposed to be funny, but it's a very serious profession for a lot of people.
It is.
Some people's dreams and some people's goals and some people's ambitions. So telling it from a realistic standpoint is I think really helps it.
And it's a whole different world, right?
Right.
It's a different world that a lot of people don't know about, which is why I like that he brought it up. It's funny because I've talked to you about it. I've talked to a lot of the schmoes about it. Like Christian, Ken, Mark. A lot of different people in the schmoes grew up with wrestling. To an extent of like obsession and love and just like this is their life. I was one of those people, and I know you know that as well. I've talked to you about it. Professional wrestling was my life, dude. Like the WWE, I ordered all the pay-per-views. I freaking wanted to be a professional wrestler like for a very long time. Like it didn't just die when I was like, oh, when you're really little, you want to be. No, I wanted to be one until I got up to like 12, I think. I really wanted to be a professional wrestler. It was my life, like the character, the stories. So watching this movie for me and watching what Mickey Rourke goes through, what a lot of people don't know, that the wrestlers actually go through a lot of pain, so much that they're addicted to painkillers, that they actually obsess over their appearance and with roidings or with doing roids or getting into character, learning all the moves that they need to learn before when they get in the ring, as well as I love, what I love too? the hardcore wrestling scene. That scene right before he has a heart attack.
Right.
That's one that a lot of people don't know about, and that a lot of people don't view. There's a very fine line between professional wrestling, WWE, and ECW, hardcore rules wrestling, which is it's a line that a lot of people didn't really want to cross. But dude, as I was watching that, I was like, crap, hardcore wrestling. I love hardcore wrestling. The thumbtacks, the freaking chairs, the barbed wire bats, like all that lifestyle of how it's the same thing, but it's not the same thing at all. And how that he's willing to do crazy things to his body, like the staple scene.
Right.
When I was just like, don't do it, man. Like that whole thing to me was.
And he even holds it there like for a second.
Yes.
Like it's building suspense. Like, don't do it.
You're like, no, dude. I'll take the bat. I'll take the chair. I'll take the
Right.
freaking barbed wire, but don't freaking staple me. And it's
Right.
something so little, but you're just like, nah, bro. But for me, it's like that whole wrestling mentality in the wrestling world and kind of destroying your body. Really, you really are destroying your body when you're put through that many years of wrestling. And he looks so old in the film too. And I mean, obviously he's an older guy, but he looks so much more fragile and old. Darren Aronofsky does a really good job of like selling the veteran wrestler who's been doing this for so long, and he's so obsessed with it, and he's so addicted to it that he literally gets rid of his family for it. And he
Right.
like pushes away his daughter so much that it's just his only family left is the crowd, is the audience. So I love that about the wrestler.
Yeah, and again, like I said, it strives for realism. There's not a lot of flashy editing. There's not a lot of crazy camera work. And I think in doing that, he's able to really get into the heart and the meat and the grittiness of the world, of the people. Because when you meet like side characters like Marissa Tomei's character, she's dealing with a lot of her own personal strife, being a stripper, but trying to provide for her child and whatnot. And I think this movie is is Darren Aronofsky's way of getting into the heart of like a middle America kind of crowd. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Most of his other movies are set in like New York or I don't know if he has a movie set in Los Angeles. Actually,
I don't think he does. No.
But his movies are more about like broad strokes of society, of commentating on urban and suburban. But this movie is like one that just solely focuses on the heart of his people and his characters, and it's a small little community that it involves itself in. So I think it's really interesting. And then once we turn over to something like Black Swan, it becomes a lot more. It's still the same principle. Obviously, it's still set in New York, I believe.
Yeah.
But it hones in on why dance is so important to Natalie Portman, why ballet is so important to these people, why is it so important to her mother, why is it so important to the Malia Kulis character, and why people are motivated to pursue those crafts, and what goes lies ahead of them for them.
Yeah, it to me it's also a commentary on personality and just the it's crazy because that movie, just thinking about it now, I didn't plan this out at all, but it also kind of reminds me of Nocturnal Animals, which is that there's always a line, or not always, but there's a line between people when they start to break down in a certain way, right? Because in Nocturnal Animals, it's Jake Gyllenhaal's character, where he's pushed and he's pushed and he's pushed, but he's never willing to go all the way. He's just not willing to push far enough. And that's the same with Natalie's character of Nina, where she's so refined and so detailed and so, I want to be perfect, I want to be wholesome, I want to be right, but I can't let loose, I can't give myself away, I can't let go, I can't push that boundary of willing to compromise who I am as what she thinks she is, right? Because she thinks that I'm this very proper, nice, pretty girl, and I don't do that. That's not correct. I'm a ballet dancer. I'm very, like she's always this very like character who's not willing to push herself all the way. And when the craft requires that to push yourself and to do you have it in you, whole thing, right?
Right.
Of breaking down that wall within yourself and becoming a different version of yourself, which is the Black Swan for her, right? And I love how Aronofsky, he takes the story of Swan Lake, right? Which there's actually a story to it.
Yes.
And he makes that underlying theme, and it makes it the actual movie. I love that. How she's like, well, I have to become the Black Swan, and then she kills herself because she's in love with her lover, but her lover, cheated on her with someone else. And it's that whole progression of that story that drives the character itself. And I think that's so fascinating because her progress or her progression to become the Black Swan or become the darker version of herself is what the movie's all about. It's all about Natalie breaking down that wall and getting behind the whole, like, living with your mom till you're like 30, being super proper, not eating anything, never willing to live a little. Like they say in the film, they say it twice. Mila Kunis says it to her, and the professor says it to her, the dance instructor. They say, hey, live a little, let loose, get a little more wild. 3 things that she's never done. She's never let loose, she never gets wild, because she's always so addicted to herself and the way she is and to the craft.
And when she does start to break out, that's when the trouble starts to hit.
Exactly.
That's where the consequences of her action really start to catch up with her. And I think that's interesting that you bring that up, because there was actually like a line in the original script that was cut out of the movie where the dance instructor tells her, like, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he basically says, unlike music or unlike paintings that last forever, dance is fleeting. It's about living in the moment now and being in that moment and experiencing that.
That's good.
And I think that's indicative of the overall theme of the movie, is that once you go out and branch out and live, that's when you can finally succeed, especially in something like performance, that you're able to be your best you in your performance. That's when she becomes the Swan King, when she finally lets it all go, when she's ready to give her all to the craft. And live in that moment.
Yeah, it really is, and it's one of those things where it stays with you, not in a recording, but almost in the back of your mind or in your soul, right? Mm-hmm. A performance does, or an amazing performance where you're just like, you capture that moment and it's in your mind and you remember that. That's a cool line, and it's also like, just that progression of her becoming the Black Swan in the end, and like you said, taking it too far. Right, where she wants to go, she's like, I can't break out, and then when she breaks out so much that she just goes so far that she loses her mind, and that she really starts losing herself in the craft in a way that's like the dance instructor says in the movie, dangerous.
Right.
Where you're so powerful in the way you bring dancing to life that you're almost a danger to yourself. Mm-hmm. Because you don't know where they're going to do or what they're going to do, and that's what makes her so dangerous in the movie. Right.
And I think that ties back into what we were just talking about, the wrestler. Same thing with like the live performance, being in that moment, being in the crowd, and really following your dreams to conquering that. So
I was just remembering the moment in the movie when he's like, when he gets next to the guy who's in the wheelchair and he has the robotic the metal leg.
Yeah.
And he's like, use the leg, and he's like. Everyone's like, use the leg, and I'm like watching the movie and I'm like, dude, use the damn leg. And he's like, in that moment, he's thinking to himself, that's weird. And then he's like, I gotta use the damn leg.
Right.
I gotta use the leg. But I don't know why I brought that up. I just thought it was a funny moment in the movie.
That's good.
But speaking of moments in the movie, when she finally gives her Black Swan performance, it's so freaking good. I can't lie, because I remember watching, every time I watch a performance movie, like whether it be Whiplash, which is another one, at the end of the movie, I'm legit cheering, because I'm so invested in the movie. And when I have a space, which is my own personal house, and I don't have to worry about moviegoers, I start cheering. Like, I legit start cheering. And I remember watching when she does the Black Swan performance, and I'm like, yo, let's go, girl. Get it, girl. Let's go. And she starts going off, and she gives an amazing performance.
Yeah.
Like you're just like, damn, Natalie Portman did that?
Right.
Damn. And there's that one shot that always stays with me, which is when she's the Black Swan and she's in all the makeup and stuff, and she has those crazy eyes, and then she does the fleeting towards the camera and then fleet away from it, where she goes towards the camera and then away from the camera, and then she does that eyes connection to you, and the camera zooms in and then zooms out. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
God, that's so good. It really makes you feel like, man, she really did become Black Swan. This teacher's good, man.
right. And I think that's just another tribute to the filmmaking that he's able to use. That camera work, He used the same DP on a lot of his films. I'm gonna pull up his name right now, but
Sure.
the way that the tracking shots and the zoom shots and the movement shots are orchestrated are so in a way that you're always following his character, and it's particularly in the dance sequence. You see a lot of when she finally starts letting go of herself, letting out. It goes from a lot of close-ups, a lot of medium shots of her actually doing the performance, then the wide shots kind of representing the audience and how they're wowed, and whenever you cut to the audience or whatever, it's fascinating. So that's why I think especially in shooting a performance, it's tough because you don't know how compelling it'll be to a cinematic audience just watching a live dance, or in the case of like Whiplash, like a live drumming, or the wrestler with the wrestling. But he's able to shoot those sequences in a way that isn't like cheesy or isn't like over the top, but feels real and feels natural.
Yeah.
And that you can really connect to.
Cool. I'm going to say my last word on Black Swan and the Wrestler. For the Wrestler, it really is Wrestler and Black Swan. The thing that really stands out, again, obviously starting this conversation, was the performances of Mickey Rourke and Natalie Portman.
Right.
Their transformation. Mickey Rourke with learning how to wrestle, becoming enormous, legit huge as far as buff wise, and learning the motions of wrestling. With Natalie Portman becoming a ballet dancer. Like, damn, she legit became a dancer, transforming her body and showing the destruction that ballet does to a girl's body. It destroys her body. Like, their feet are messed up.
Right.
They're so skinny that they look just deformed in the sense of like you can't eat anything because it's just not only is it not aesthetically pleasing, but it's easier to be light on your feet.
Right.
Be light on your feet when you're that skinny. And the way that Natalie Portman legit gave her whole body and soul into that performance is just, to me, is the thing that stands out the most in Black Swan and in The Wrestler.
Right, and I didn't mention before, and I kind of wish I would have mentioned it in the Rec Room conversation as well, but the way that Darren uses mirrors and his actors looking into mirrors, and it's kind of a moment of self-reflection, right?
Yep.
We see that in The Wrestler before when he's like looking in the mirror, he's like judging his own aesthetic. You kind of talked about that a little bit before. And of course, in Black Swan, it's even taken to the next level where her reflection, her mirror, is actually becoming its own manifestation.
Yep.
Where she's fighting, like we mentioned before, the duality
Of herself.
Almost
like a doppelganger version of herself.
Right, which I think plays heavily into his theme of, the biggest battle you're going to fight is against yourself. And once you win that battle or lose your battle, what's the end consequences?
Absolutely. Cool. Let's move over to a recent favorite of my Aronofsky films, which is called The Fountain. Damn, this movie. This movie is wild, dude.
It's out there.
It's out there. It's legit out there. It's literally out there. Do you know what's crazy? I remember watching a little bit of this movie a while back, right? This came out in 2006.
Yes.
I remember watching a little bit a while back, never really paid attention to it. Rewatching this movie that I rewatched it a couple days ago. Holy crap, man, this movie's out there. And I freaking love this movie. Like, I don't know why it stuck with me so much. I feel like you might disagree with me. Most people will probably disagree with me, but I feel like everyone's talking about Mother. I feel like this is his most ambitious film. I feel like as far as ambition, as far as out there, as far as like really dealing with themes that are crazy and really dealing with layers of metaphors and layers of symbolism, I feel like this one, even more than Mother, I feel like Mother is really cool and it has, metaphors and symbolism, but I feel like the metaphors and symbolism are, you can catch it, you can grab it. This one, it's like you try and grab it, but it slips away from you. Like it's just so larger than life, legitimately larger than life. The thing that stands out again to me in this movie is the relationship between Hugh Jackman and Rachel Weisz. I love Hugh Jackman. Hugh Jackman's my boy. Hugh Jackman's my brother. He's Wolverine for life, and he's an amazing actor. He gives enormous, almost Oscar-winning performance in this movie that goes completely And Rachel Weisz is someone that I've loved since for anyone out there who's a fan of the Brendan Fraser mummy movies, which I love the Brendan Fraser mummy movies, I freaking love her. Like, I remember watching her in those movies and being like, man, I love this woman. Like, as a kid, like, I'm like 8 years old, right? And then her in this movie, man, I love this woman. Right. Like, she's so good. Like, every moment, you could see her body starting to decay. And you could feel it. You could really feel it. And you could feel her love for Hugh Jackman's character and the love that Hugh Jackman feels for her. But I almost feel like he leads this movie, but I almost feel like she might even take this movie from him in the sense of like how much she gave me with the little she was in.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know. What are your thoughts on this movie? Just general thoughts.
General thoughts. I mean, I think this was it was a tough movie to get off the ground for Darren Aronofsky to make. And I think the reason being is because it's so out there.
It is.
It's so, it involves numerous different timelines, different stories, how those all intersect with the idea of the fountain of youth, the meaning of life. I think it's Darren Aronofsky asking a lot of questions that he's been asking himself for a long time and putting it all on film and trying to transcribe them in a way that relates to him the most. And I think that's really fascinating. I think the movie is probably one of the most interesting religious pieces I think I've ever watched, in the sense that it really is about transcending belief and how once we believe in something and once we start to look at something as the story of life or the story of meaning or the story of self, how we maybe might be able to transcend that. And that's what I think that's what's really crazy about the Fountain. I enjoy that movie a lot. I don't know if it's my favorite Aronofsky movie.
Okay.
It definitely has like a lot of moments where I have to, what's happening here,
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if I even still fully understand what the movie is.
But that's what that's what I'm trying to say.
Right.
That's what I feel like. That's why I like it so much, because I feel like it's the most ambitious Aronofsky film because there's still so many moments that I'm like, I honestly don't know what that meant. Whereas in Mother, I can kind of give you my interpretation of it, and it's a pretty educated guess.
Right.
Whereas I give an educated guess for The Fountain, and I sound like an idiot.
Yeah.
Where I'm just like, is it about his I don't know, his lover, his wife? Like, I don't know. I can't tell you.
Yeah.
Because it's so out there and it's so ambitious and it's so it's such an interesting film, and I love how you bring up the structure, because it's a non-linear structure.
Yes.
And it's done in three versions, right? So it's Hugh Jackman and Rachel Weisz as the queen in Spain and the explorer, kind of like an explorer type person who's in search of the Fountain of Youth, and that's kind of the book that Rachel Weisz's character is writing when it comes to modern times. And in modern times, it's Hugh Jackman as a doctor, as a surgeon who is trying to find a cure for his wife's cancer.
Right.
So he's doing a lot of it's experimental surgery is what it is, right? There's doctors who actually do experimental surgery, and their goal and their whole thing is just doing experiments on animals, right? Because you can do it on animals, that's legal. You can't really do it with humans. So he's doing experimental surgery in order to find a cure for his wife's tumor. And in the future, it's Hugh Jackman's character as like this weird, bald, freaking like Buddhism monk-looking guy who's like traveling to space in a giant bubble with a giant tree that he talks to and eats from. Like, that one is so out there that you're just like, what's going on? But it's what it is. It's like, it's supposed to be like a future version of him who's like traveling in a spaceship that's like an organic bubble. And that tree, at least what I think it is, this is all me, right? I think it's Rachel Weisz in that tree. And it's that whole concept where she says it in the movie, where it's like a lot of people in the Mayan, culture, they would bury their ancestors with trees and with seeds so that when they grow, they can be legitimately like
brought back to life.
Brought back to life with that tree. So every fruit, every branch, every touch of the tree is a touch of that person that you're now touching. It's a very interesting concept. So what it is, it's Hugh Jackman, traveling to what they believe to be the Mayan, almost heaven, I guess, almost Mayan afterlife, which is the Nebula star system. I think the name of it was Xibalba,
I believe, yeah.
Xibalba, which is the Mayan version of heaven. and it's Hugh Jackman trying to legitimately, physically reach heaven in order to be reborn with his wife on Earth. It's crazy.
And it's
some heady stuff, dude. It's really is some crazy stuff that I appreciate it so much. I really do, because it's stuff that it's beyond religious. It's physical religion.
Right, and it's funny. When it was initially released, it has like a 51% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Made no money at all.
Made no money. $15 million worldwide on a $35 million budget.
No money.
So it wasn't successful critically or commercially, but over time it started to build like a following. And I think it's funny. I was watching an interview with Aronofsky, and he said that The Fountain is what he believes is like closest to his own.
I heard that.
Beliefs.
Yeah, he said that's the closest thing that I have to a belief system.
Right.
So like that's his religion. Where I'm like, that's crazy.
Right.
You believe in a star system that'll blow you up into be reborn? Sure, man. More power to you. I actually respect that. I think that's cool.
Right.
That's cool that he makes like a real version of like his religion.
Right. And some would even look at his. Some would even look at what he puts on display there as maybe a metaphor for Christianity, or if not a metaphor, a commentary on it, or how like his visual perception of heaven or hell or whatever fashion you want to look at it.
Sure.
I've seen some interpretations saying that the future timeline is maybe like the afterlife above. The regular, the modern times is like what we live in, like on Earth. The times, from the past, or like from under, from hell or whatnot. There's numerous ways to read this movie, and I have no idea how to.
I don't know either. This is the biggest anomaly I feel for Aronofsky, and that's such an interesting point to bring up Christianity, because again, we're going to talk about it a lot in Mother and in Noah, but I consider myself to be a very spiritual person and to be a part of the Christian faith, but in a different way. And looking at it with the Aronofsky eyes, it's when you believe in God and when you believe in heaven, you don't believe it in a physical manifestation. You believe it in a physical manifestation, but not quite something you can physically attain, right?
Yeah.
Where
something you can visualize.
Exactly. Whereas in this movie, the concept of like physically reaching heaven, like if I got in a spaceship and I tried to go to heaven, I can legit go to heaven. It's like, no, you can't. As a Christian, you don't believe that. But the fact that he does believe that, and he says, yeah, you get in a spaceship and you freaking go up there and you try to reach heaven to try and be reborn again is interesting. And also, the tree of life. I thought that was such an interesting point where it's like, no, the Garden of Eden was real. God did make the Garden of Eden. The tree of knowledge was something that, eating from the tree of knowledge was something that God didn't want Adam and Eve to do. But the tree of life was also something that God made, and reaching the physical tree of life, like the actual fountain of youth, right? That concept to me is so interesting. Like, what if God actually did leave artifacts or did leave creations that are still perfect and that are not tainted by sin? Right. Like those, it's mind blowing. I'm just like, wow, that's crazy. As a Christian, I'm like, what if he did do that? Aronofsky reaches those themes that are just so interesting and so mind boggling. Like, it really is a concept that you're like, I don't know. It's a good point. What if there is a tree of life that we haven't found yet and it's hidden somewhere?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I totally agree with that. I think what, I'm not familiar with like Mayan religion.
Yeah, me neither.
Or, stuff like that. So I don't want to speak, negatively or speak ignorantly, I should say, about those topics. But at least from my we talked about before. You're very Christian. Or spiritual, I should say, and you practice Christianity a lot. We both did. I went to like a Christian school for a lot of my life as well. So in reading and watching the film and kind of reading the subtext of it, it's kind of hard not to put like a spin on Christianity and whatnot on it, at least from my perspective.
Sure.
But that being said, is definitely an experimental exploration that we'll see continued
in
throughout
other of his films. Yeah,
filmography.
to be honest, last word on The Fountain. I love it. I think the score is still so beautiful.
Yes.
Rachel Weisz, Please Marry Me. Hugh Jackman, you can be at the wedding as well. Let's move on to Noah. Let's do Noah and Mother at the same time.
Do we want to throw up like a spoiler thing for people who haven't seen Mother?
Sure.
If you haven't seen Mother, we're gonna spoil it.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Go see Mother so
yeah.
you can be a part of this podcast.
Right.
Noah, it's funny because leading up to Noah, they marketed this movie as like a biblical epic, get ready for an awesome Bible movie. It was very much marketed towards the Christian demographic, which probably was a mistake.
It was. I believe
definitely
so.
a mistake.
Yeah.
But then again, as I said before, as watching this movie as a Christian, and especially someone like watching it with my family, right? Watching it with someone like my dad, who's like his knowledge of the Word of God, of the Bible is out of this world. Like my dad knows the Bible front and back, left and right, and watching it with him is so interesting because it brings up so many different concepts. Because his initial reaction was like, nah, brah. But his second reaction, he told me recently, he's like, you know what? The more I think of it, the more, because the main thing that took Christians out of the movie is the rock creatures.
Yeah.
It's the main thing that everyone was like, cool, no, rock creatures?
Right.
Really?
Right.
Rock creatures? But the more I talked to my dad about it, he's like, the fallen angel concept, because there is fallen angels, the concept of them turning into demons, coming to earth and being some sort of demonic presence. But then the way Aronofsky did it was them coming to earth and being like, almost like making up for atonement. So they feel so bad about being kicked out of heaven, fallen angels, that they're like, we're going to just try and, help you build the ark because we messed up and this is our way of atonement. And the way that they formed with the earth, which is what Aronofsky says in the movie, is very interesting. Like, obviously it's not biblical, but it's very interesting.
Right.
So that's one thing that stands out to me. And obviously the underlying theme in Noah and in Mother is the theme of like the way humanity is so cruel and is so deprived that we take God's creation, which is the earth, which is God's creation before mankind, and we just destroy it. We just shit on it. We kick all over it. We just treat the earth like crap. And it's something that we see in both Mother and in Noah. So
Right. No, I mean, Noah is one of the most experimental mainstream releases I think I've seen. Obviously, Russell Crowe is in it. I forget who else.
Jennifer Connelly.
Jennifer Connelly, yeah.
Yeah, shout out to Requiem for a Dream with Jennifer Connelly.
Right.
Logan Lerman. Emma Watson.
Emma Watson.
Emma
yeah.
Watson, bro. I love Emma Watson. Hermione Granger, bro.
Right. And it's fascinating. And like this biblical tale how he goes reaches so far out in depicting like fantasy with I don't necessarily want to say fantasy, but like the illustration of these rock creatures. Obviously, the film itself is based on a French graphic novel that he was adapting into the movie.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I was like, it's based on the Bible, bro.
Yeah, it's based on the Bible and it's based on a graphic novel.
Cool,
as well.
cool.
So,
I didn't know that.
So I think that's where it shares a lot of its common imagery. But I think as a film in and of itself, it obviously didn't open to much acclaim. The reviews were very mixed.
Very negative reviews. Yeah.
And like you said, for a lot of the Christian audience,
Which I don't. I see again. Again, this is me stepping out of putting myself out of, because there's so many bubbles that humanity puts themselves into and society puts themselves into, and it's this whole Christian faith and Christian community that I'm always shocked when people who identify themselves as Christian don't like when Hollywood takes biblical things because they're afraid that they're going to change some things. When, as someone who doesn't question and say, wait a minute, why aren't you just happy that they're bringing up the Bible and they're bringing up concepts to different people who don't know a lot about the Bible, which to me, that's what Mother is, right? Mother is like, this is the story. It should just be called The Story of the Bible by Aronofsky. That's what Mother is. Right. It really is. And if I was a Christian, and as being a Christian, I'd be like, cool, let's find out what his story of the Bible is. Because at least it's something that touches on the Word of God and touches on biblical teachings, right?
Right.
That to me always baffles me because it's the concept of taking care of the planet, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where to me that's something that's so common sense that I'm surprised that people are offended by that. You know what I'm saying, right?
Right.
That Darren Aronofsky has this huge thing of environmentalism, where it's like taking care of your environment, taking care of the planet, climate change, this whole thing, destroying the planet, humanity's destruction of the place that it lives in. To me, that's, yeah, why not, dude, right? I mean,
Right.
if you love God that much, if you respect God that much, why wouldn't you take care of the planet that he gave you? Like, I don't know, that to me is something that is seen throughout the films, and looking back at it, I respect Noah quite a bit. I like the concept that he's telling because it is, in a sense, very biblical. The sense of humanity being so deprived and so unrighteous. That's very biblical.
Right.
And that's why we needed the sacrifice of Christ, right?
Right.
Let's jump into Mother a little bit.
Well, I was going to say before, real quick on Noah.
Sure.
A lot of technical aspects that are used in Noah kind of reflect some of Aronofsky's earlier work. We kind of talked about the hip hop montage before. He kind of used that in a way that whole like 5 minute like sequence of like the creation or of Earth, and yeah, he has a lot of very visionary moments in that movie.
Man, yeah.
Just with the idea of the flood, and weirdly enough, like his portrayal of war and violence almost is kind of like, I kind of want to say beautiful, like in the sense that it really paints a picture of humanity in a sense that disagreeing and how that's going to lead to a downfall, how it's going to lead to our downfall. He ultimately repurposes that into how these guys fell to get on the ark, how they fell to abide by the word that was given to them by a greater power.
Sure.
So
and that's something we see again in Mother.
Right. Exactly.
With Mother. So basically, if everyone trying to debate what Mother means, but Mother is a story of the Bible.
Yeah.
It's Javier Bardem who plays God, Jennifer Lawrence who plays Mother Nature. Or, to be honest, I'm not the only one who feels this way, but I feel like she also plays like an extension of God, or a different version of God. But it's Mother Nature. But I feel like she plays two roles. Mother Nature and an extension of God. This is my interpretation. And then Ed Harris comes to the house, which the house that she's taking care of quite a bit, and completely uninvited.
Yeah, it's like Adam.
Yeah. And then comes the wife,
Eve,
played by
Michelle
Pfeiffer, Eve. The two sons, Cain and Abel. They kill. Cain kills Abel. Right. Showing sin coming into the world.
Right.
Michelle Pfeiffer is so curious about this room that they keep going into.
They tell her specifically, do not touch this room,
And that
do not grab
represents
the apple,
the Garden of Eden, the forbidden fruit, sin coming into the world with the forbidden fruit, breaking of the forbidden fruit. I'm sorry, that came before Cain and Abel, because that was the first sin.
Right.
And then Javier Bardem locking that room, to me, represented God locking up heaven, almost being like, you can come on earth and you can live on earth, but my paradise is still reserved for me and my wife.
Right.
For this is a separate place for me. So when he locks it up with the wood, with the plywood or whatever, and then we see a version of the flood, which is when they break the counter and when all the people are coming in.
Right. And then it's a small detail, like after that pipe is broken, like when she's kicking people out, it's raining outside.
It is.
Where it wasn't raining before.
Exactly. So that's the flood. Everyone's out, meaning when God killed everyone by doing the flood, right? Because he killed everyone except for Noah and his family. And then kind of remakes humanity, and then everyone comes back to the house, and then it's God making the New Testament, right?
Where his wife becomes pregnant.
His wife becomes pregnant after creating the New Testament, and then we see.
Before it was like he was angry at her, and then they had like revenge sex, and then after she became pregnant, then he started writing.
Oh, you're right. I'm so sorry.
Yeah. So
you're correct.
It's like it's like as it's like you said, it's like the New Testament. It's like Jesus being conceptualized, and I guess like she, in that sense, she'll be like Mother Mary or whatnot, the Virgin Mary, and then
inspiring, and also like inspiring a new leaf, I guess you could say, for humanity.
Right.
Right. Where that's what this should be the case, but it isn't the case because guess what? We have some baby killing in this movie.
Right,
Spoilers.
right.
Which is, I guess, what is the most controversial thing about this movie,
Okay.
which I didn't see as I mean, obviously it's weird and it's kind of disturbing, but I knew that was going to happen. I was like, yeah, there's going to be some baby killing in this movie because if that baby represents Christ, guess what? Humanity kills Christ.
Yeah.
That's biblical in itself. And then what I like about the movie is that after that whole Bible scenario, we get into more future moments, which is war, religion, the creation of religion, right? When we see that people who have seen Javier Bardem's character God and who touch Javier Bardem's character of God, they go on to touch other people and be like, hey, God touched me, let me touch you. And that's kind of very Catholic in a way, which is the priest kind of representing an extension of God. So that was a very interesting point because it's almost like a circular motion of religion leading to war, leading to people saying, hey, I need this, I need that, give me this, give me that. And it's crazy how this God who wanted to create a relationship with humanity now is leading to so much war and so much destruction that humanity has brought upon Earth.
Right.
To the point that they're willing to destroy the Earth. And it leads to the finale of the movie, which I'm curious to hear your interpretation about the finale. When she goes to the basement, lights it up, and blows up the freaking place. What did you feel that was?
Well, I mean, I think that's just like the last book of the Bible, right? Like Revelation.
Revelation.
Yeah.
That's how I feel. It's very much Revelation. It's very much the apocalypse, right? Where it's like you pushed too far that the Earth kills itself. Humanity destroys humanity. Which signifies by the flames, the fire, and just the destruction of Earth itself being pushed to the core of Revelation, right? It could also signify, I'm surprised a lot of people haven't said this. I feel like I'm the only one that said this, but hell, right? The flames represent hell. The basement, because she goes down to the basement. She goes to the furnace. A name that the Bible uses to describe hell is the furnace. So it could be a description of hell as well. And I feel like it's a very ambitious movie. I still feel like The Fountain's more ambitious because to me, I get this. I get the Bible, and The Fountain I still don't get. But at the same time, I really like what he did. I really like that he brought in these biblical themes in the movie.
Right. No,
So-
it's definitely interesting. And I have a copy of the statement he gave to the press.
Oh, shit. That's a lot.
Yeah. No, I'm just going to read like one paragraph in particular. I think it's going to help give us a little insight into what he's talking about. First off, he starts by talking about how there's nearly 8 billion people on Earth. We're facing issues of the ecosystem, restricting government, climate control, terrorism, all things of that nature. So he writes in this press release, from this premortal soup of angst and helplessness, I woke up one morning and this movie poured out of me like a fever dream. All of my previous films just stayed with me for many years, but I wrote the first draft of Mother in 5 days. Within a year, we were rolling cameras, and now 2 years later, we have the honor of returning to the Leto for the world premiere. So that's where he had the premiere, obviously. So again, he wrote this. He wrote it
in 5 days. Apparently, he was not happy with what was going on in the world.
Frustrated in the world, yeah, and
it's all stuff that makes sense to me.
Right.
It's nothing out of this world to me. Where a lot of people are saying like, well, it's this crazy, lesson that Aronofsky's beating the head over with. Not really. To me, it's something so essential in the world, taking care of the planet and the destruction of humanity. And the Bible, these are all stories that have been told for centuries and thousands of years.
Right, but Aronofsky tells it in like a graphic and pretty brutal way.
Sure, that's very true.
It's interesting, and I think there's like some interesting like side plots that come up in Mother that I think are very fascinating, like the whole idea of Kristen Wiig coming in as like the book publicist after he writes the new book, and she ends up being like a war puppeteer.
Sure.
I think that speaks to a larger issue of
I also like the concept of like war and the concept of how religion has brought in so much war and how that's not what God intended at all, and yet it's what it delivered. And in real life, like in humanity, how much wars have been started in the name of God.
Right.
I love that idea, and I also throughout the entire movie I was looking for good. I was like, is there anyone who's good? And we saw two examples of that. One was a soldier who saw that she was pregnant and said, "Hey, come with me, I'll protect you."
Oh, right.
And then the other one was, which a little bit more brief, was the doctor who was telling her to breathe, calm down, it's gonna be okay, just breathe, you gotta push. Okay, remember when she was like pregnant? That was the only two good examples of like good human beings, right? Where I was like, all right, it's so at least we have a little bit of good, where people are willing to do. People are still showing a tiny bit of mercy towards mother, I guess you can say.
Right. And I think it's interesting the way the time in this movie is shifted. Obviously, most of the movie is, before, if we're sticking with the biblical interpretation of it, most of it takes place Old Testament, or just Javier Bardem and Jennifer Lawrence just by themselves. It's kind of like her just being like...
And Ed Harris and Michelle Pfeiffer as well.
And then eventually coming in, but that's not until like 20 minutes. Sure. If you look into like the whole timeline of the movie, it's like really the whole thing with the Christ baby being born and being eaten happens in like the last 15 minutes, which is like, that makes sense. Like if you look at the whole Earth's lifespan and just look at the period of time we're in, we're like a tiny... like miniature fraction of what the Earth represents, but
I mean absolutely, and to me it's I don't know, I think there's so many other different little things that the movie has to say that I feel that I personally, because again this is our identification with the movie, because there probably is like an Aronofsky version of what mother means, but this is what mother means to us. What I saw with the relationship between Javier Bardem's God character and Jennifer Lawrence's mother is the fact that I feel like they're yin and yang. They're both one and the same, where Javier Bardem is one extension of God, being the God of creativity, of obsession with mankind, of an artist, I guess you could say, and Jennifer Lawrence being a God of giving, a God of love, a God of mercy, a God of patience. I don't know. I felt like
I almost kind of think like the opposite of that.
Like, but also a God of wrath and a God of anger, and because it was her that brought about anger, and Javier Bardem's character didn't bring the anger, where she was much more the emotion in the movie, right? Where she goes from...
She was the focal character. She was the one we followed, and
she was the one that eventually blew everything up, right? Because it was the one that she would just had enough.
Well, and I think to speak to your point, Javier Bardem is obviously the one who's like, oh yeah, we have to forgive them. We have to forgive them. They're doing their thing,
And that's very much from the Bible, because God is constantly forgiving humanity and mankind.
Right, and then but with Jennifer Lawrence though, we see her uncomfort from the very beginning.
Yeah.
Right? Even when it's just those two alone. Aronofsky uses a lot of intense close-ups whenever the camera's on Jennifer Lawrence to kind of put you in like a
you could feel her emotion.
A vibe of discomfort, a vibe of not.
And you feel it.
You feel it from the very beginning, and I think again that's the idea of the subjective camera, putting you in her perspective throughout the entire thing. It could have been if this movie was from the perspective of Javier Bardem,
it would be very
different. Yeah. And there's some different interpretations on this movie outside of just Christianity.
Sure.
Some people say it's a commentary on abuse, domestic abuse. Some people say it's something along the lines of the creative process, how that goes along, how people struggle with that, and fame and fortune and whatnot. So
yeah, I mean, I just feel like it's very much on the nose about the Bible, and Darren Aronofsky has not only said it, but he kind of spells it out in the movie. One last thing I want to say about mothers as we close up on this discussion, which I feel like is a pretty good discussion, right? All right.
Let us know in the comments.
Please don't. Please, only happy comments. I think one last thing I want to say about it, I like that Darren Aronofsky is willing to give us the Bible in a different version. I think that's great. One other thing that I wanted to say was the heart. I forgot.
The heart of the house.
The heart of the house. To me, it's another. It can mean so many things, but to me, it means like the constant giving and the constant love that is being held out by Mother Nature and by the extension of humanity, and just so much that you're just giving your heart, literal heart, out. To me, that rang true so much with what I believe to be the story of the Bible, which is the story of love. And if that's ever the case, I feel like at least we saw a glimpse of that in the movie with her giving her heart.
Right, and I think it's an extension of the themes that we talked about earlier in this show. Of course, we see, the idea of motherhood. It's the title of the movie, Mother.
Sure.
Right? It's Mother Nature. It's giving. It's all that. It's all about obsession. Her obsession of just being alone. Just leave me alone.
Yeah. And taking care of her house too.
Right, and Javier Bardem's obsession and addiction with humankind, with being around people, with being supported by people. People who follow him and whatnot. And again, these are themes that we saw in Black Swan and The Wrestler and Requiem for a Dream and Pi. Just all of his films kind of culminate into a lot of these themes that
he brings up in all of his movies.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Cool. My final words on Aronofsky. I think the guy's a genius. I think he's a master filmmaker. I love what he brings to every movie. I love that he deals with concepts of life and death and the meaning of life, the purpose of life, God, creation is a big thing of his as well. And he does it in a masterful filmmaking way, whether it be score, whether it be performances. The guy is just honestly one of my favorite filmmakers, and I think he's a genius. So,
Yeah.
Any final words?
Yeah, he's brilliant. I think that there aren't a lot of directors who use the craft of film to the extent that he is willing to push it.
Yeah.
We've mentioned a lot about his camera, his editing, his sound. His portrayal of his characters are what guides us through.
And it's the most powerful thing in each movie of his, I believe.
Exactly, yeah.
Is the character.
You're always put into the backseat of the mind of each character, each lead character at least, and get to see their plight and their struggle and how they are trying to overcome that.
Absolutely.
You understand everybody's motivation. You
Yep.
understand everything they're trying to do and how they, and a lot of times you can visualize it, going back to like the hallucinations and daydreams and stuff like that. So I think the way Aronofsky, as a pure filmmaker, he's one of the best out there working today. So
Cool, man. All right, guys. That was our first episode on Darren Aronofsky. Hopefully you enjoyed our conversation. Guys, we want to make this podcast not just about us, but also about you guys. Let us know what you want to hear about. Let us know what kind of things you want us to dive into. Let us know what filmmakers you want us to talk about, or let us know what you enjoyed about this conversation. What is your favorite Aronofsky film and why? Make sure you tell us in the comments down below, and make sure you tune in for more episodes of The Meaning of. Great. That was fun. I think I had a lot of fun.
I had a lot of fun too.
Cool, man. All right. Ace and RB3, we are peacing out. Make sure you guys subscribe.